Welcome everyone to Color Commentary. We are your Pauper commentators, Michael Petchick and Adrian Guarzales. How's it going, Adrian?
Pretty good, Mike. How are you?
Doing all right. We're recording on a day where you had the day off. I had a half day, so high spirits all around. We've been relaxing, and we've got challenges results to talk about for the first time in a while. But first off, we've got to take care of some upkeep stuff. First, we are brought to you this week, as every week, in part by Original Magic Art. Original Magic Art has a variety of tokens, dice bags, playmats, and art prints from throughout the history of Magic and the world at large. And if you're looking to pick up any of these products, we are an affiliate. So you can either go to originalmagicart.store/commentary, spelled as it is in the name of the podcast, or use the affiliate code commentary in all caps to get 10% off your order, and we get a little bit of a kickback. So either way you choose to go about this, it's helping out the show. It's getting you a little bit of a discount, and everyone wins, right? But yeah, once again, that is commentary, all caps, is an affiliate code, or just going to the URL originalmagicart.store/commentary, spelled as is in the name of this podcast. What do you have for us today, Adrian?
Well, we are also brought in part from listeners like you. For just as little as $1 episode, you can hear the full show, including our pre and post shows, and get access to our patron exclusive Discord channel. And I have heard that the pre and post show is worth $1. So
yes, one of our patrons did tell us that it's enough entertainment, and I like to think it's enjoyable.
We should just have a podcast where we just talk about random stuff.
We should figure that out. We should at least do it like as a one-off, like goofball thing. But let's get into what we're talking about today, because we've got a lot of stuff to talk about. So challenge results came out today with our new Monday recording schedule, and we picked out 2 decks that we wanted to talk about this week. And you picked out the first one. So how about you take the lead on that one?
Sure, yeah. So in second place, actually, there were 2 copies of it in the top 8, but we're talking about the second place list. JP0822's Esper Blue-White Familiars list. I guess it is technically Esper. So yeah, let's get to talking about it. First off, we have 4 copies of Godfair's Faithful, which is a W for a 0/4. Whenever you cast a blue, black, or red spell, you gain 1 life. So I have played against this build of the deck, and it is very good against aggro.
Yeah, the 1-drop 0/4 that gains you life incrementally over the course of the game is exactly what you want to be doing if you're trying to just dirtle into a combo. And
yeah, and if you have multiple of these, you're going to gain a lot of life.
Yeah, and as compared to selling, like, the closest comparison I could come up with is comparing these, like the Soul Sister effects, Soul Warden and Soul's Attendant, and this one just is so much harder to interact with and blocks better, and it doesn't trigger quite as frequently, but it just feels like having 4 of these versus having a full 8 Soul Sisters, this seems more resilient. And obviously better in this particular build.
Yeah, exactly. It's pretty strong, and it can help you, claw your way out of some tough spots. Following up with that, we have 3 copies of Mnemonic Wall. 5 mana gets you an 0/4 whenever it enters the battlefield as defender. You may return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. So this is part of the scary part of the combo, right? Once they play this, they're about to go off, because the combo is going to be using this, ghostly flickering it, and then either getting value or infinitely milling you or what have you.
Yeah, and we've talked about it time and time again on this show. This is a common thread throughout the history of Pauper since the printing of Ghostly Flicker. People have been trying to find ways to abuse this to win games, and it's good. This used to be a very big problem. Like, obviously, the fact that we're still talking about Familiars after it has had multiple bans hit it says something about the resiliency of this particular interaction here. And it's still good all these years later.
Following up that, we have 4 copies of Muldrifter. 5, I mean, you know it, you love it. Should I say it?
I don't think we need to at this point. It's a staple of every mid-range or combo, or like any blue deck that can hit 5 mana is going to play Muldrifter more or less.
Right. I will say niche interaction. Well, not even a niche interaction. You can evoke Mole Drifter and then flicker it for 6 mana, which can be kind of fun sometimes. But typically, this is one of the pairings that you'll do with Ghostly Flicker and Mnemonic Wall. Following that, we have a copy of Sage's Row Denizen, which is our Mole Drifter beats also our way to win the game, but Sage's Row is how you win on Magic Online in like a single turn. Sage's Row Denizen, for those of you who don't know, is a gate crash common. 2 and a blue gets you a 2/3. But the important part is whenever another blue creature enters the battlefield under your control, target player puts the top 2 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. So combine this with Mnemonic Wall and Ghostly Flicker, you have a way to infinitely mill your opponent. Usually this card is not. You don't really need it in paper. It's really more of a concession to the fact that it takes less clicks and a lot of other ways to win on Magic Online.
I mean, it also is a blue option to win the game. We don't really, like, you could go infinite and use, I guess, Train of Thought or something like that. If you can actually generate mana out of the combo, although at this point that's a little bit more difficult to do. So Sage's Row is kind of become the nice safe option for this. Again, it reduces the number of clicks on Mitgo, which back in the day there was a very real risk of an inexperienced pilot timing out with familiars. So I'm not surprised to see it here as one of the options.
Good. Up next, we've got Seagate Oracle. 3 mana gets you a 1/3. When Seagate Oracle enters the battlefield, look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand, and the other one on the bottom of your library. So really a way to filter cards, get a blocker on the ground. Also a good target for Ghostly Flicker. If you target 2 of these with Ghostly Flicker, you get the ability twice, which is kind of interesting. So yeah, really just here, speed bump, and it's able to filter through your deck, even if you're not actually comboing off quite yet.
Yeah. Obviously, with these types of decks, you want it so that you'll get some level of value off of most of your creatures if you can flicker them, and preferably most of your permanents. But yeah, Seagate Oracle's good. It also digs pretty efficiently and can dig into non-spell combo pieces, which is, I think, the main reason that we're seeing this here instead of its competitor Augur of Bolas. So makes sense.
Right. And we actually only have 18 instants and sorceries. The first is 4 copies of
hold on. You missed the last 4 white creatures that might be a little important.
I skipped over the namesake of the deck, Sunscape Familiar. So familiars were a cycle from Plane Shift.
You got it.
I think. Okay, great. I wanted to say Planar Chaos, but I knew that was wrong. Plane Shift, where they reduce the cost of allied color spells. So Sunscape Familiar is the white one. 1 and a white gets you an 0/3 with Defender. Maybe it's been a errata to have Defender. Green spells and blue spells you play cost 1 less to play. So the reason I sort of stumbled on whether or not this deck had black in it, it must in the sideboard, is because back in the old days this was typically played alongside the black version of this for red and blue spells. So this is how we net mana off of our bounce lands that we're also playing, so that we can generate tons and tons of mana in order to combo out our opponents.
Now that said, we don't have the untap land synergy as much anymore in these decks, so you do have to jump through a little bit of a few more hurdles to actually get there. But I believe that there's some way with Snap to at least stay mana neutral, if I'm correct.
Well, yeah, maybe.
Let's get into the spells. We're bad at combo decks. We've established this.
We have 4 copies of Deep Analysis. 3 in a blue gets you a sorcery. Target player draws 2 cards. Flashback, 1 and you pay 3 life. This also doubles as a win condition, as we saw back in the Drake days, where you can infinitely mill your opponent with this as well. Takes a lot more clicks, though. And then we have
sure does.
And then we have 4 copies of Preordain, because in this deck, it's just much better than Ponder.
Yeah, just being able to dig is very important, and yeah, it's a good option.
In our instant slot, we have 1 copy of Brainstorm, because we have a couple of shuffle effects that can be used. We have 1 copy of Dispel, counter target instant. I guess I could say what Brainstorm does. Draw 3 cards, then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. So you can use it to shuffle away cards you don't really want. 3 copies of Ghostly Flicker. 2 in a blue gets you exile 2 target artifacts, creatures, and or lands you control. Then return those cards to the battlefield under your control. So that's a very essential combo piece. We have one copy of Negate. I presume Negate and Dispel are here to protect the combo from counter spells, being non-mana intensive counter spells themselves.
Yeah, I've got to imagine that that's the case. I'm not 100% sure that this deck couldn't just support regular counterspell, but I don't know. I can see Negate. Negate probably interacts with more of the stuff that you want to interact with anyway, and it's a little bit easier to cast. So in those edge cases where one would work and the other wouldn't, it probably gets that little nose ahead.
Up next, we've got 4 copies of Snap, which is a really sweet card. 1 in a blue, instant. Return target creature to its owner's hand, untap up to 2 lands. So this is a huge mana engine in this deck because you can use it to untap your bounce lands, which we'll get to in a second. But you can also use it to return, a key card back to your hand. You can use it to return one of your opponent's creatures back to their hand if you're under, a threat. It's just a really, really powerful card in this deck, and it's honestly pretty busted. And it's, I think, the only untapped mechanic we still have.
I think that's correct. I can't think of any others that have not. Oh no, we have Rewind as well, but that's a counter spell, which makes it a little bit more situational. And Unwind as well that they printed recently, actually.
Right. We have one good untapped spell still.
We have one good untapped spell that doesn't require you to have a spell already on the stack to interact with. And I think that's the important bit here.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, so can Snap actually go infinite? Because I'm trying to work this through in my head. We joke about us being bad at combo decks.
Let's try it. Let's do the thought exercise. Let's say we have out a Sunscape Familiar, which means Snap only costs you. Let's also say that we have out 2 Azorius Chanceries. So let me think. So we tap an Azorius Chancery for you, floating white. We tap the other one, floating blue-white. We snap a creature back to the hand, untapping both of those. So we have you white, or 2 white, 1 U. We untap. We have access to UUWW again. So that's 7 mana. And then what?
Well, so I think the goal here is, and I might be incorrect here, is if you have the wall and you have Snap and you have 2 Sunscape Familiars, I think you can get infinite ETBs because the wall now only costs 3. Snap only casts 1, so you cost 1. So you float 4 off of 2 Chanceries. Use 1 blue to snap the wall back to your hand, untap. Use the other 3 to cast the wall again. Get back, snap, repeat.
The issue was I wasn't going deep enough.
I believe that's how this deck actually would go infinite if it wanted to. I don't know if it can actually go infinite. I guess like if you had 2 walls, snap, and like flicker, there's maybe a way to make that infinite. But I think if you want to actually go infinite, you need multiple familiars, mnemonic wall, and snap, which is not unrealistic by any means. You have a lot of card draw in this deck, so you're going to get to those cards. But it's a lot more fragile than it used to be. It's no longer just like cast a fairies, cast a wall, flicker the 2 of them, get infinite mana, and just dome you with whatever X spell.
Right, and we'll go over one of the older lists just to sort of illustrate what we're talking about as well. One thing I do kind of like is this serrated arrows, which is really sweet with Ghostly Flicker because you can essentially use it to stall out the game for a really long time. It's really useful against creature decks. Serrated Arrows, for those of you who don't know, 4 mana gets you an artifact. Serrated Arrows enters the battlefield with 3 arrowhead counters on it. If you your upkeep, if there are no arrowhead counters on Serrated Arrows, sacrifice it, tap to remove an arrowhead counter from Serrated Arrows to put a -1/-1 counter on target creature. So if you have even just Ghostly Flicker out, you don't even need the combo. You can just machine gun down your opponent's creatures with this.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, as we've alluded to before, we are in a state within the metagame where being able to interact with Tireless Tribe combo has become a necessity in your main deck if you don't already naturally have a way to counter it. So this does that pretty well.
It's also really good against Delver.
Yeah, it is really good against Delver. Yeah. Do you want to take us through these lands here?
Yes, the lands are very important in this deck. To start us off, we have 4 copies of Ash Barrens and 3 copies of Evolving Wilds, which go pretty well with our one of Brainstorm. We have 4 copies of Azorius Chancery and 1 copy of Deemer Aqueduct. Now, for those of you who don't know what these cards do, they're called bounce lands or Karus, even though they're not truly the Karu cycle because that's much older. And basically what these do is you have to enter the battlefield tapped, and you have to return a land to your hand, but they tap for 2 mana, so they're really, really good with Snap. Not so good with Ghostly Flicker, though. We have 6 islands, 2 plains, and then a 1 of Mortuary Mire, which is also a good Flicker target. So we must have a very light black splash in the sideboard, based on the Deemer Aqueduct and Mortuary Mire. And that lets us get back key cards that might have died during the course of the game.
I hate to break it to you, there's actually no black splash anywhere in this deck. It's just playing Mortuary Mire as a way to resurrect things.
Well, it's also playing Deemer Aqueduct, maybe just as a 5th bounce land.
Yeah.
I actually hadn't taken a look at the sideboard yet. A lot of these decks will play Reaping the Graves in the sideboard.
Yeah, it looks like this player has chosen to go with Mortuary Mire as their way to buy stuff back, because I almost feel like in this deck, a lot of the times Reaping might be overkill. Like, I think it might just be raised dead a lot of the time.
I will say that Mortuary Mire is pretty sweet because it combos with Ghostly Flicker and the bounce lands. So that's pretty neat.
Yeah. I think it's probably a good pick here. I can see situations where, like, if you had your whole combo in the graveyard, Reaping the Graves would be better, but I think that Mortuary Mire is a little bit more measured in terms of not taking up an actual spell slot. And you're not a very color-intensive deck as is. There's nothing with more than 1 pip of a specific color, so I don't think it hurts as much that this is functionally a colorless land here.
Gotcha.
All right. So with that main deck,
that's the sideboard.
Familiars is back, and that's kind of weird to me. I don't know.
Yeah, we booed on it for a little bit, but there are some talented Familiars brewers. 420 Dragon being, I think, really the person who started bringing it back at the very least. Certainly very key in refining the deck as it stands today. And then other people like to play it. Like, we get a player who's playing it locally now. It's a fun deck. It's a sweet deck. It makes you feel like you're getting to do busted things, and you are. The only thing that's kind of interesting about it is, even though it's a blue deck, it can't be a Gush deck because you have too many non-islands.
Yeah, I don't think Gush is kind of the be-all, end-all of most blue decks these days. I think it's still one of the best things you could be doing in the format, but I think that this deck attacks upon an axis where it doesn't need to have Gush necessarily, so I don't mind that as much. And I do really think that the thing that brought this deck back into the limelight was kind of a slow refinement over many, many iterations, but also the printing of Godfar's Faithful, because I think that that's one of those kind of how Pauper always gets these cards nowadays, which are just incrementally good enough to see play, where it's not obvious out of the box. I don't remember even what we said about it during our set review of Hour of Devastation, given that was probably almost a year ago at this point, but I can't imagine we were super high on this card, were we?
I think we might have said, if you have a way of flickering things, this seems fine. But at the time, Familiars wasn't even really a deck, so I think it did fly a little bit under our radar.
Yeah, and I'm kind of glad to see it back in this sort of diminished capacity, because some of our listeners might not have been playing Pauper long enough to remember when Esper Familiars was in the format. And Adrian, how upsetting was that deck to lose to?
It was pretty tilting. LSV played the deck in a series of videos, and he said it feels like I'm just playing a different format. And that was before a lot of pros had turned their attention to Pauper. So just to give you an idea of the degenerate type of stuff that deck was doing.
And I think most of that lies in the fact that, like, Cloud of Fairies was always too good for our format.
Right. Well, on that same tangent, Cloud of Fairies was also just insane in Delver, because what they could do is they could go turn 1 Delver, turn 2 Cloud of Fairies, untap, leave up Spellsetter Sprite.
or Counterspell, or any like 2-mana weird thing. Like it was a problem, and I'm glad that it finally saw the axe. But I'm also kind of glad to see that this deck still exists.
Here's the other thing, Mike. You might not remember this. You could cycle Cloud of Fairies.
Yes, the hidden mode of that card that I think I saw maybe once or twice in my entire time playing against it.
Yeah, you can cycle it. So, add insult to injury. If it somehow was not good, you could get rid of it.
Literally never dead. Although, I guess I'm trying to think through here. Did it actually have overlap with Mortuary Mire? Because that would have been plenty gross in this shell.
I don't think so.
I don't think so. I want to say that it got banned before Battle, but I don't remember exactly when Battle came out. Regardless, the deck is now fair. Like, it's actually a very reasonable deck that no one's upset about, and cool. I'm glad that we have a diversity of combo decks in the format with this, Elves, Tribe, and, whatever other weird decks people have put together. Do you want to walk us through the sideboard here, Adrian?
Yeah, absolutely. First off, we got additional copy of Dispel. We have 1 copy of Disenchant. I call it Disenchant. Disenchant. 1 and a white, destroy target artifact or enchantment. 2 copies of Ethereal Haze, which is a fog in white from Kamigawa. Prevent all damage that would be dealt by creatures this turn. 2 copies Relic of Progenitus. Exiling cards out of the graveyard, always a good thing. 2 extra copies Serrated Arrows. 1 copy Erase. Exile target enchantment. What do you think that's in there for?
I mean, I think it's just there because it's cheap. And this deck probably doesn't match up great against stuff like Boggles, I'd have to imagine. Also, like, any white deck is going to have Journey as some of its removal, and this might be a hedge against that just to be able to get your stuff back, but I'd imagine it's mostly Boggles.
Okay. 4 copies Hydroblast, one of the best blue spells in the format, and then 2 copies Stonehorde Dignitary, because, we sometimes just want to lock our opponents out of the game.
Now, I'm curious, what matchups would you bring Stonehorn in for?
Seems pretty good versus
Boros
or Delver.
I'm kind of inclined to say the 2 big green decks. Like, Stompy gets going quickly and like can make that 0-4 body irrelevant, and also Elves, right?
Yeah, well, the thing about Stonehorde Dignitary is it's pretty slow.
It is pretty slow, but
like you don't have that
options against Elves, right?
That's true.
Like,
yeah, I mean, it's just the fact remains that most decks in Pauper have to win via damage, and so therefore Stonehorde Dignitary is going to be good against most decks if you're able to get that loop going.
Now, there was another list similar to this in the top 8. I think it was at 5th place that did run a Stonehorn Dignitary in the main. So I'm willing to bet that that's one of those things that's flexible. Like, you could run it in the main, you could run it in the side. It's probably good enough against a large chunk of the format that it's probably okay as a singleton in the main deck. But yeah, this sideboard looks like what I'd expect a blue-white sideboard to look like. It's all reasonable cards that you would want to play that don't disrupt your game plan and help shore up matchups that might not be super favorable.
Yeah. Do we want to take a look at the old list?
Yeah, we found this was, I believe, actually, this is the last Esper Familiars deck to 5-0 a Pauper League.
And we're going on 3 years. This 5-0 is from January 24th, 2016. First creature in the deck, 4 copies of Cloud of Fairies. 1 in the blue, flying when Cloud of Fairies comes into play, I tap up the 2 lands, cycling 2.
And I think we can kind of skip through a few of these things just because folks know them. Like,
Yeah.
Lone Missionary is a known quantity. This one does play 2 copies of Nightscape Familiar, which is the black splash. 1 and a black for a 1/1. Blue and red spells you play cost 1 less to cast. And also, notably, it has regeneration on it for 1 and a black, which I saw activated a handful of times.
Yeah, the other big thing that I'd forgotten about, we got the main deck Reaping the Graves because you were, Esper, but also I forgot that this deck used to play a card called 4C, a sorcery for 3 and a blue, scry 4, draw 2 cards. It's actually very flavorful, but I think most of them did play one of 4C.
Well, it was just like such a huge dig. Like, if you need to get to something, that card digs 6 cards deep if you need it to.
Another card that has sort of fallen out of favor, but I think I did see 420 play, is a card called Hoodwink. 1 in the blue, instant, return target artifact, enchantment, or land to its owner's hand.
So, this was, if I remember correctly, this was the tech for the mirror, right? Because
I don't know.
If I remember correctly, this was the tech for the mirror because you could hoodwink a Karoo back to your opponent's hand and put them back on lands in a pretty significant way. But I think now that it's less popular, just not seeing as much play. And like, there's also the fact that it played compulsive research versus deep analysis.
Yeah.
And I don't feel strongly one way or the other about that. I hazard that deep analysis because it does actually draw you 4 over the course of casting all of it.
Oh, well, sorry, I misspoke earlier. This is the card that lets you mill out your opponent.
I think, is deep analysis not target player as well?
No, they are. I think this one is faster, right? Because you have to draw 3.
Yeah, you draw 3 with each go, and it's also only 3 mana. So, yeah, there's this ridiculous loop where you flicker 2 mnemonic walls. You go infinite by flickering Mnemonic Wall and Cloud of Fairies. You flicker 2 Mnemonic Walls, grabbing back, flicker, and compulsive research. And you just make your opponent draw out their deck. And this showed up in the blue-red Drake decks as well. And it's another out, right?
Yeah. Good card.
But yeah, I'm glad to see this deck is back and not in a way that like makes my eye visibly twitch from like shell shock memories of how absolutely meta warping Esper Familiars was as a list. And now it's just kind of this weird funky combo deck that uses Ghostly Flicker, and that's kind of fine. I don't know, I like combo having a place within our metagame.
Should we talk about the other deck?
Yeah, so last week we did our big old deep dive on blue-red control, and it showed up. It was in, I believe, 20th place, you said?
Yes. It is a little bit different from the deck we discussed last week, and it's actually playing Hypothesizzle, which is the main reason I wanted to talk about it.
Yeah, so very, very slim creature base. They slimmed it down to just 4 Augur of Bolus, but then upped to 32 whole spells. And I'm going to kind of run through some of these because a lot of these are format staples. You can listen to our last episode 121, if you want most of these to be read to you. I'm just going to kind of pick out stuff that wasn't covered there. But we got 2 Brainstorm, 2 Firebolt, 4 Flame Slash, a Lightning Bolt, 4 Preordains, 4 Counterspells, and then 1 Into the Royal, which is a spicy little number from Zendikar block. It's 1 in a blue, and it returns a creature to its owner's hand. Or actually, I need to double check that because I don't remember if it's creature, right?
I think it's permanent. Target non-land permanent.
Wow.
I will say whoever did that card must be an Alabama fan. You know how I know?
How?
Royal Tide.
Jeez. Just getting those niche points with the college football fans. But then it has kicker of 1 in a blue, and you draw a card. And we actually saw this functionally reprinted in Dominaria with Blink of an Eye, which this player obviously does not have the true patrician taste in art that we have on this podcast, because I do think Blink of an Eye looks better.
Royal Tide.
All right, then we got 4 Think Twice. This is an old staple from blue-black control decks back in the day. Think Twice is 1 in a blue for an instant. You draw a card. Then it has flashback for 2 in a blue. And I love this card. It's very good. Mikey
Likey.
Well, we talked at length a while back about Faithless Looting and how it represented card disadvantage on the first use and then card neutral on the second use. So while Think Twice is only one card, it is card neutral on the first use, card positive on the second use, because you're not actually using a card out of your hand to draw a card the second time. But
Right.
yeah, Think Twice, very good when you just need like extra card draw. Then we have 4 copies of Exclude. It's 2 and a blue, counter a creature spell, draw a card. Adrian, this seems a little excessive to me.
Does it, Mike?
4 Exclude in the main deck. That's
a lot. We talked about this a little bit last week. Exclude is definitely good. Don't get me wrong. It also costs a lot, and it really requires you to already be ahead or at parity in order to be truly good.
It can help you kind of dig out of a hole. Like if your opponents cast a few creatures and you still exclude one of their later creatures, you are still drawing the card. Like there's the opportunity to draw into an answer there. I think it's definitely better when you're already ahead, though.
Yeah.
Next up, we have Una's Grace, 2 and a blue for an instant. Draw a card, and then it has Retrace. You can discard a land and pay this card's cost if it's in your graveyard, and cast it again. This is the Ancestor to Jumpstart. What do you think of Una's Grace here?
We typically see Una's Grace in decks like this one, very slow, with lots of lands. We are playing bounce lands, so it's really not that bad. I like it as a one of. I think Whispers of the Muse is the other one that used to be pretty popular.
That's what, 6? It's 1 blue to draw a card, and then you can pay 6 to buy it back.
Yeah, it says buyback. So you typically see those in slower control lists. I think it's okay. If it's the last card in your hand and it's turn 11 and you are drawing lands, it's good there. I mean that earnestly, not like, wow, it's only good in this one spot, because this deck I think probably gets in that position quite a lot, where they keep parity, it turns into a top deck war, and Una's Grace is great in the top deck war.
Yeah. And then obviously, as we mentioned at the top of the segment, there's 2 copies of Hypothesizzle, which I will remind people about, because I definitely saw people already misplaying this card at the pre-release the other week. It's 3 blue and a red for an instant. Draw 2 cards. Then you may discard a card. When you do, deal 4 damage to target creature. So this is brand new. It's a little weird. If you let this spell resolve, you cannot respond to the targeting. That's all you really need to know. That is really weird.
It's like a triggered ability on a spell.
So these are referred to as reflexive triggers, and I'm just going to put on my judge hat for a second here. And this is something that Wizards has been doing more recently, because I don't know if you've ever seen one of these abilities where you target something and then you choose whether or not you'll actually use the ability.
Yeah, the Spellskite Arcbound Ravager.
Exactly. It's a weird sort of situation where those aren't great and Wizards doesn't like them. So what a reflexive trigger does is it just makes one. You have this phrase, when you do, which makes it so that you can have this weird spell that does 4 damage to target creature, but never targets while it's being placed on the stack. So it leads to this sort of interesting head game of, if your opponent casts this, they could kill one of your things. So if you use a pump spell to save it, they are not obligated to target that thing with it, and they could kill something else. Or, there's all these sort of variables here that force interaction before the spell actually picks a target. And sometimes the player's just going to draw into something that they like more than blowing something up. So now it does have the catch that you do have to discard a non-land card, so you're discarding a, quote, real card. But I don't think it's the worst thing here, especially just as an instant speed draw 2 in the late game. And
that's bizarre. Thanks for the explanation.
Yeah, so it's a weird thing that they've started doing. The first time we actually saw this in Pauper was Sparktongue Dragon from Dominaria, which had that was that Dominaria?
Yeah.
Or was that Core Set?
I don't know, but it's the one where you pay 3, and when you do, it does 3 damage.
Exactly. It must have been Core Set, because it wasn't Kicker, and that was the thing. It was similar to Kicker, but it wasn't actually Kicker. And the interesting thing about that was it enters the battlefield. You have an option to pay if you do this ability resolves. And I have to wonder if Wizards is starting to use this templating because it reduces the number of sort of gotcha moments. Because if Hypothesizzle just read draw 2, discard a card, deal 4 damage to target creature, your opponent, if you targeted one of their creatures and they just sacrifice that creature, all of Hypothesizzle fails to resolve. So I have to wonder if this is a bit of them trying to like reduce that negative experience that could occur with older templating, but it's cool to see. All right, now that we've gone on our little miniature rules rant, let's talk about this 3 of that we're going to need to talk about, and I have a sinking feeling we're going to be talking about for a while now. Devious Cover-Up. Now, Adrian, we both kind of shrugged our shoulders at this one in the set review.
Boy, were we wrong.
So we missed something that I think we should at least give like a little bit of a mea culpa here. So Devious Cover-Up is 2 blue for an instant counter target spell. If that spell would be countered this way, exile it instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard. That's not great at 4 mana. The additional text at the end of this is you may shuffle up to 4 target cards from your graveyard into your library. Now, Adrian, what did we miss about this card?
You can target your previous Devious Cover-Up with this Devious Cover-Up.
Yeah, so here's the thing. Devious Cover-Up kind of works to make it so you can't mill out as long as your opponent keeps playing spells. So if you put your opponent in a situation where they need to cast things to win the game, Devious Cover-Up kind of works as a win condition. Also, Devious Cover-Up, counter your thing. The first one, I don't know, game's been going for a while. You toss a couple Flame Slashes and a Lightning Bolt into the deck. You've re-upped all your removal. You've got this counterspell sitting here. The next time you use one of them, you shuffle that Devious Cover-Up right back in.
And look, I love the format. I love the community. But people who play Pauper really like to deck their opponents for some reason.
It is just one of those things that we have started to we've loved for unknown reasons. So I do want to give a quick shout out to one of my coworkers, Steven, who did point out when I talked to him about this that this does make this Pauper Nexus of Fate.
Oh my god.
It's
genius.
Yeah, no, I was a little upset that I didn't get to come up with that one, but thank you for that, Steven. I did appreciate it.
Steven, you're a genius.
And I know he listened, so I wait to hear you giggle at work, but there, buddy. All right, but yes, Devious Cover-Up is going to be, I think, unfortunately, a player in the metagame, and it's something you're going to have to get used to. Options for this: Graveyard Hate, also playing more counterspells. There's going to be some very miserable control mirrors. Thankfully, Devious Cover-Up does exile stuff that it counters. So if you Devious Cover-Up someone else's Devious Cover-Up,
you're ahead.
You're ahead. You're winning that game. But it's here. And I don't think that this is going to break the format in half, but I do think that it gives control decks another way to include a win con that already does something that they want to be doing. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw slow decks making a comeback. We've already seen a handful of 5-0s and challenge results from teaching style lists that are, got on the slim fast, shrunk back down to 60 cards. Except now they get to play Devious Cover-Up, which kind of lets them pretend that they're playing 68.
Devious Cover-Up is the Pauper Slim Fast. You heard it here.
Yeah. All right. So now that we've gotten that out of the way as arguably one of the most important things that we missed during our set review, again, this deck has a copy of Serrated Arrows. Serrated Arrows, just good. Just play it. It's just a good card. Then we've got one enchantment here. We've got a singleton copy of Jace's Erasure, and this is the first time I've ever seen this outside of a dedicated, bunch of mill cards deck or Turbo Fog. And what do you think of Jace's Erasure here?
It seems pretty good with Devious Cover-Up.
Yeah, I think that this entire deck's game plan is just Devious Cover-Up, put back removal or draw spells as necessary, have Jace's Erasure out.
It's the real quote-unquote win condition in this deck.
Yeah. I think this deck can still, in theory, win if it just Devious Cover-Ups enough, but Jace's Erasure at least makes it possible to win with this on Mako. I think that's
right. This is a more conventional, more conventional win con.
Yeah, and again, like the fact that you're playing Devious Cover-Up as a way to kind of feed into the Jace's Erasure as a win con also lets you protect Jace's Erasure from being blown up. This has a lot of like very, very weird synergies. I mean, you can also just Devious Cover-Up something later and shuffle the Jace's Erasure back into your deck. So I think I'm comfortable saying that I think Devious Cover-Up was our biggest miss in recent history, and I'm surprised it took this little time for us to figure this out. Do you feel comfortable with that?
Yeah.
All right, land base. 3 Ash Barrens, 2 Evolving Wilds, 9 islands, 3 Izzet Boilerworks, the Izzet Karoo. We've got 1 mountain and 4 Swiftwater Cliffs. That's the Izzet Gainland. Pretty stock,
seems
right?
Good.
Yeah,
seems good. Again, we see the Karoos putting in some work. So, yeah, it seems pretty normal. Again, a blue deck without Gush, which I just always like to point out because it's interesting to me.
Now, does this deck actually see enough of its cards on a routine basis, you think, to actually play Gush reliably? It seems to run counterintuitive. Like, control decks want to hit their lands. I think this deck could probably excuse a Singleton Gush.
I just like Gush.
I know you do. It's a good card. Steve Menendian wrote an entire book about it.
In relationship to combo decks.
Sure, but he still wrote a whole book about a single Magic card.
Yeah.
Then for the sideboard, we've got 2 Electrickeries, format staple, you know it, you love it. 2 Gorilla Shamans, 3 Hydroblasts, 4 Pyroblasts, 2 Relic of Progenitus, 1 Shattering Pulse, and 1 Serrated Arrows. Shattering Pulse is kind of a spicy little include here.
My read from this sideboard is this person was very worried about beating Affinity.
Yeah, the double Gorilla Shamans coupled with Hydroblasts for the red Game Enders and Shattering Pulse.
If you look at this top 8, though, there is a lot of Affinity in it. So perhaps they did come prepared, even if they didn't place perhaps as highly as they would have liked to.
I do.
And this is a list by Entropy 263. I don't know if we actually shouted out the deck.
I don't think we did. But Shattering Pulse, I do want to talk about for a minute. It's 1 in a red, destroy target artifact, which is just shatter. But it also just has buyback 3 stapled onto it.
It's pretty good.
This is one that I've played in the sideboard of Tron and nowhere else, and it kind of fits here pretty perfectly. Especially because, like, again, we are using a way to recycle our library into our graveyard into our library. It's, even if you use it once, it could potentially come back. The only thing that stands out to me about this is Relic really the pick here for Grave Hate?
You would prefer Nihil Spellbomb, even without black?
I almost would. Like, this is a deck that has a decent amount of stuff that cares about the graveyard.
Are you underrating just the tap ability of Relic?
I can see where you're coming from there with just being able to procedurally do it. I guess maybe I wouldn't mind a split in some way of that and Nihil Spellbomb or something. I don't think we can splash into black to actually pay for it or run Bojuka Bog.
No, I think Bojuka Bog is good only if your deck is already base black.
Yeah, I think that's the general wisdom regarding that card is it does have a real cost. A colorless tap land that happens to exile stuff is not worth it if it's a colorless land.
Most of the times in Pauper, you want to be able to instant speed exile your opponent's graveyard, not in response to something, not preemptively exile it with a card like Bog. If you can crop rotate for it, that's fine too. But the decks that are playing crop rotation are basically Tron.
Yeah.
So it doesn't fit. I just don't think Bojuka Bog fits in a lot of decks. It fits fine in mono black.
If it's fine in mono black, it probably fits fine in any of your brews that are, again, base black, just as kind of a like side bit of value as a one of. But yeah, Relic is like, I'm not in love with it. I do see what you're saying about it being able to procedurally exile the graveyard, and the fact that it cantrips in blue-red is nice. I'm just not stoked about it. I feel like if this deck could produce black mana for free, it would definitely be running Spellbomb over this, but that's just me. So this list, is this the future of Pauper Control? Are we just doomed to rue the day that Devious Cover-Up was printed for the rest of our lives?
I think Devious Cover-Up will see a lot of play. I don't know if the decks will stay blue-red.
Well, I mean, we've already seen blue-black options showing up in results from actual leagues, so I don't think that I don't think that this is the only version of a Devious Cover-Up deck that we will ever see, but I definitely think that this could potentially show up again, even with some minor tweaks. I personally probably would feel a little uncomfortable running this few actual creatures. I might want like even just like a one of Mnemonic Wall or Muldrifter or something else. But maybe that's my hang up. Yeah.
No. Yeah.
I don't know. I'm excited. I'm glad that a card from Guilds of Ravnica is immediately having two cards, in fact, are immediately getting played in a deck that, 20th place is not amazing, but, it got reported.
We're looking at it.
Yeah, we're looking at it. You got eyes on it. And this does look like an archetypical blue-red deck that's gone very hard on the control axis of things. And yeah, I think that's fine. So yeah, those were the two that we picked out. This was kind of a weird week, and we talked about it a little bit in the pre-show. This was a pretty slim week population-wise for...
Yeah, I think there were only like 55 people playing in the challenge this week.
Yeah, that's a little lighter than we usually see. So we did get, I think as a result of that, I think most of the people who are missing seem to be, more routine grinders. So some of those sort of more off-the-wall beat brews had kind of a chance to show their faces, and that is pretty neat. Like getting to see that stuff that was like just barely under the cut bubble up to the top is nice. It's nice to see these ideas within the format. All right, Adrian, do you have anything else for us this week, or I guess
that's it.
I guess we still have a bit of time here. So just take us out of the show.
Okay. Thanks for joining us today. This podcast is brought to the support of our patrons, especially our Rhino Fist. Thank you, Rhino Fist. Please consider supporting us just like them if you like the show. Check below this video or the description of this podcast for details on where to find us. We'd like to remind you, if you're listening to this on a platform with reviews, they're appreciated because they boost our visibility. If you've got a deck list or an idea for a topic, you can contact us either via our website or you can email us directly at colorcommentary@gmail.com. Special thanks to my LGS Pat's Games, Mike's LGS JPP Comics, and of course, L. I thank him every single week. You can find our theme song Quantitative and other great tracks over at his SoundCloud, which is soundcloud.net/ELLELLELL. Till next week, this is Adrian and Mike, and we are signing off for Color Commentary.